Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. Let's start the presentation with a small correction. I saw in the document it says Corporate Finance Department. As a matter of fact, I'm working for the Direct Equity Department in the bank, and I'm responsible for direct equity investments in various sectors, infrastructure, energy efficiency, and now also renewables. What I would like to do today, and I understand this is the last session for today, so I will try to make it concise. And I would like to try to talk about what we see as major trends in the European renewable universe and which kind of implications this can have for Russia. So now I'm trying to understand how this works. Кто-то поможет? No. Okay, great. This one. Thank you. As I said, we have first a short look on the status and the trends. We will then have a look at the renewable potential in Russia, which is not very inspiring. And then I think it will be the major question to answer why actually should Russia develop a renewable investment scheme, and why should Russia develop the renewable sector as such. If we look at Europe, we see that we have quite tremendous dynamics in the last 5 years. We see various countries being close to having reached their targets. Some countries have still something to do. We see that I think in 2005 the installment of new capacity in the renewable sector was something like 3 gigawatt. Last year it was 30 gigawatt. If we if we extrapolate these dynamics to 2020, we understand that European Union countries will have met their targets which they already set. As a matter of fact, right today, we're also already having discussions about extending these targets, about expanding these targets. These kind of dynamics are quite interesting, and as we see, in 2020, renewables might go up to 460 gigawatts. If we break down the overall figure, we'll see quite, for us as Gazprom Bank and also as Russian companies, quite interesting dynamics in a way that the number of newly installed capacities in the solar but also in the wind sector already exceed the number of capacities newly installed in the traditional thermal sectors, in particular in gas. This is obviously due to a green tariff scheme. It is clear, and I think everybody understands that renewables can be only incentivized by providing the regulatory regime, the respective regulatory regime. We see that the number of countries which provide such regulatory regime are growing, and also like that the most recent crises, already 1, 2, have not any impact on that. If we summarize for us what we see basically like as the most important trends in the European renewable universe, the first one is obviously government support. Government support has been there, is still there. There have been certain adjustments in order to reduce or to change these kind of incentive schemes which provided too much of return to investors because like technology advanced, because of various other factors. But we do not see any kind of slackening or any kind of like substantial decrease in this incentive scheme. We also saw like the last couple of years partially quite tremendous increase in technology advancement. We see that costs, in particular life cycle costs per unit of production, are decreasing. And what we also see is the structural change. The structural change in the sense that over a third of European power capacity is already in a state, in an age where it will need to be replaced, and the question will need to be asked, what is more efficient, what is cheaper, what provides basically better results, either gas-fired capacity or renewable capacity. One also quite interesting topic for us as Russian companies, also as bank, to look at the question of grid parity. It has become quite clear that, in particular in terms of onshore wind, that onshore wind installations are already quite close to grid parity. We also see a quite positive development in the photovoltaic sector. If we look at the situation of renewables in Russia, we do have certain installments. It's basically the majority of that is biomass and small hydro. Biomass is mainly located in regions where we have some timber production, some paper mills, where companies, factories have been using the byproducts in order to install small power and heat generation assets. We do have some wind. Actually, what is quite interesting is the geothermal, which has been advanced already in Soviet times, and the Soviet Union has been pioneering that. But all in all, if you look at the data, it's a little bit more than 1,000 megawatt. It's not very exciting. So basically in Russia, in terms of renewables, we do stand at the very, very beginning. This slide is a very, very good example of not being very successful in trying to put a map of Russia into a very small slide in a PowerPoint presentation. The technical potential of wind resources in Russia is huge. There are certain analysis of that. The question is that the technical wind potential amounts to something like 40 million megawatt hours annually. It's mainly located in coastal regions, which is quite obvious, in Murmansk, Krasnodar, whereas you only have very, very few already operational wind parks. The only thing which I think is quite interesting to mention, nevertheless, not having a real fundamentally stable green tariff scheme, we nevertheless have up to 3,000 megawatt of wind parks in planning, in development stage, where either wind metering currently is going on or is already finalized and the projects are developed. The biomass potential in Russia is also huge. It is, on the one side, simply for a simple fact that you have the biomass. On the other side, that you have now new regulations in Russia which should incentivize the producers of biomass to utilize it, because obviously, like in farming, obviously also like in paper producing, timber producing, you will need to deal with the ecological consequences of the byproducts of your production, and Russia has been actually quite proactive on that front. In the last couple of years, new laws came into being which should incentivize the utilization of biomass. The major question nevertheless remains why Russia actually should go down the route of incentivizing renewables. I think the first question is grid parity, in anticipation of grid parity. I think we are already, in particular if we compare new build gas or coal-fired generation versus, for example, onshore wind generation, we're already quite close. I think onshore wind generation is even like close if you look at grid parity, which is a combination of old generation and new build generation. You should bear in mind that onshore wind, but also biomass, some other sources of renewables, need a certain lead time. You will need to make the wind metering, you will need to develop the project, you will need to go through the licensing regime. So it's not a question that you say like in 2015 or 16 or even like 14, we will have grid parity, we will wait until this moment and then start. If that is the case, as a matter of fact, you should start today. The second reason is, of course, something I would call long-term resource management. It is more a philosophical question. It's more like a question, why would you not use infinite resources you have at hand, which are there, versus your finite resources? Although the reserve lifetime of Russian thermal reserves is quite high, there are various figures because the actual reserve data is not really official. Nevertheless, you would want to start to utilize these resources, which actually are, as we say, renewable, where you have an infinite source of these resources. In the short term, there are various opportunities in Russia where you already can start today. These are mainly isolated regions where you have basically diesel power stations. The diesel is partially flown in, partially transported, very difficult. So the power tariffs are already quite high. And in these isolated regions, you already have grid parity. So we see that coming in the very near future. But obviously there are also like various other reasons why you could start today already, which is basically that certain like producers want to have certain independence. They want to introduce renewables for their own consumptions. We heard that today. The prosumers will also like switch over to renewables. Additional factors which can also like help in developing the renewable scene in Russia are obviously like the development of various additional sectors in terms of high-tech, in terms of producing equipment, in terms of the industry which is involved in developing these projects. Probably also export. I wouldn't see any reason why Russia shouldn't become a green power exporter, because the potential is there, and also like have obviously certain like soft qualities in terms of increasing or benefiting the investor climate in general. As the last slide of my presentation, I would like just to share a small impression with you. This is a wind park in France, where Gazprombank already invested. So we are a stakeholder, a shareholder in this wind park. It's operational, went operational last December, and is located in France in the region of Champagne. So if you forget everything which I said today, the only thing you remember, the next time you have a sip on a glass of champagne, remember this champagne has been produced with green energy by Gazprombank. Thank you very much.